The spit hit the ground an inch from her boots. "Pathetic rookie!" Staff Sergeant Marcus Reeves snarled, his face twisted with contempt as he circled the small woman standing at attention in the rain. "You think those little girl arms can carry a wounded Marine? You think that baby face scares our enemies?" 23-year-old Sarah Mitchell didn't flinch. She'd faced worse than spit and insults: Taliban fighters, Al-Qaeda operatives, enemy combatants who died never knowing the little girl who killed them was a decorated Navy SEAL. But Reeves didn't know that. Nobody on this base knew who she really was. Not yet. Before we continue with Sarah's story, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our incredible true stories of courage and vindication. Watch until the very end, you won't believe how this unfolds. And comment below with what city you're watching from, so we can see how far our stories travel around the world. Sarah Mitchell had learned to make herself small. Not physically. At 5'2" and 110 pounds, genetics had handled that. But small in the way that made people overlook you, underestimate you, dismiss you as harmless. It was a skill she'd mastered over 18 years, ever since the day her mother died, and the world taught her that being young meant being invisible, even when you were right, especially when you were right. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the parade ground at Naval Base Norfolk into a mess of mud and standing water. 43 civilian recruits stood in formation, most of them shivering, despite the Virginia heat that made the August rain feel like standing in a sauna. Sarah stood in the third row, her posture deliberately slouched, her expression carefully crafted into wide-eyed nervousness. "Welcome to hell." Reeves's voice carried across the parade ground with the kind of projection that came from years of breaking down cocky civilians. "For the next 12 weeks, your soft, pathetic civilian lives are over. You belong to me now. You belong to the United States Navy. And if you can't hack it..." He paused, his eyes scanning the formation with predatory focus. "Then get the hell off my base before you embarrass yourself." Sarah had heard variations of this speech 17 times in the past 5 years. Basic training, SEAL qualification, advanced tactical courses, counterintelligence school. Every instructor thought they were the first person to discover intimidation as a teaching method. Reeves was moving down the line now, stopping in front of each recruit, getting close enough that they could smell the coffee on his breath and see the broken capillaries in his nose. When he reached Sarah, he stopped. "What's your name, recruit?" "Jessica Reed, sir." The lie came smoothly. She'd been Jessica Reed for the past 3 weeks, ever since she'd manufactured a complete civilian identity, complete with fake employment history, social media presence, and even a carefully constructed reason for joining the military at 22, a story about wanting to serve her country after her father died of cancer. Jessica Reed. Reeves repeated, drawing out each syllable with obvious disdain. "And what makes you think you can be a United States sailor, Jessica Reed?" "I want to serve my country, sir." "You want to serve?" Reeves laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You look like you should be serving coffee at Starbucks, not serving in my Navy. How tall are you, Reed?" 5'2", sir." 5'2", and you weigh what, 100 pounds soaking wet?" 110, sir." 110 pounds. Reeves turned to address the entire formation, using Sarah as his teaching moment. "Listen up, recruits. This right here is what happens when we lower our standards. This little girl thinks she can do a job that requires carrying a 100-pound pack through the desert. She thinks those little arms can drag a 200-pound Marine out of a firefight." He turned back to Sarah. "You think you can do that, Reed? You think you're strong enough?" Sarah kept her eyes forward, her voice steady. "I'll do my best, sir." "Your best." Reeves's face was inches from hers now. "Your best isn't going to cut it when bullets are flying and people are dying. Your best is going to get good Marines killed because you're too weak, too small, too female to do the job." He stepped back. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups, right now." Sarah dropped to the mud without hesitation. The push-ups came easily. She could do 300 without breaking form, but she made herself struggle at 25, letting her arms shake, letting her breathing become labored. At 40, she collapsed into the mud. "Pathetic," Reeves spat. "Get up. Get back in formation." She stood covered in mud and returned to her position. The other recruits avoided her eyes. They'd learned the first rule of survival already: don't be noticed. Don't be the target. Don't be the one who gets made an example. But Sarah had been the target her entire life. This was nothing. Chol. Lieutenant Marcus Chen watched from his office window on the second floor of the administration building, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He'd been watching the recruit processing for the past hour, and something about the woman Reeves was currently tormenting didn't sit right with him. Marcus was 27 young for a lieutenant in naval intelligence, but he'd earned his position through an almost supernatural ability to spot patterns where others saw noise. His last assignment had involved identifying a Chinese espionage network that had been operating at Pearl Harbor for 6 years. He'd found them by noticing that maintenance requests for specific systems always came from different personnel, but were filed with identical grammatical quirks, the signature of a single handler translating Chinese operational requirements into English. Now that same pattern recognition instinct was screaming at him about Jessica Reed. He pulled up her file on his computer. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. High school graduate from Richmond. 2 years at community college studying criminal justice, worked as a security guard at a mall for 3 years. References checked out. Background investigation clean. Nothing remarkable. Nothing suspicious. Except her physical fitness scores from the preliminary screening were exactly at the minimum requirements, not below which would have disqualified her, not above which would have been expected from someone serious about military service. Exactly at the minimum across every single category. That kind of precision required deliberate effort. Marcus opened another window on his computer and pulled up the security camera footage from the recruit processing center. He scrolled back to the moment Reed stepped off the bus. There. That moment. The way she'd scanned the entire area in 3 seconds, her eyes moving in a practiced pattern: corners. First, then exits, then personnel, then back to corners. That wasn't how civilians moved. That was how operators moved. He zoomed in on her hands as she picked up her duffel bag. The wear patterns on her palms, just barely visible in the high-resolution image, didn't match someone who'd spent 3 years working mall security. They matched someone who'd spent years gripping weapons. Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Either Jessica Reed was exactly who she claimed to be, and he was seeing patterns that didn't exist, or she was someone else entirely, and the question became, why was she here? The first day of recruit training was designed to break down civilian identity and begin the process of building military discipline. It was physical, brutal, and deliberately humiliating. Reeves ran them through exercises that would have been challenging for experienced athletes, knowing full well that most of these civilians hadn't done serious physical training in years, if ever. Sarah made sure to stay in the middle of the pack. Not so far behind that she stood out, not so far ahead that anyone questioned her supposed inexperience. She stumbled when she was supposed to stumble, gasped when she was supposed to gasp, and let her form break down at exactly the moments when a genuine civilian recruit would start to fail. But she was documenting everything. The security gaps were worse than she'd feared. The guard at the main gate had barely glanced at her ID before waving the bus through. The recruit processing center had surveillance cameras, but at least 3 blind spots that any competent infiltrator could exploit. The weapons locker in the training facility had a combination lock that one of the other recruits had been able to see Reeves enter from 20 feet away. This base wouldn't stop a determined enemy. It wouldn't have stopped the terrorist cell that killed her mother 18 years ago. It wouldn't stop the next attack unless someone forced the system to change. Reed. Reeves's voice cut through her analysis. You sleeping on your feet, recruit? No, sir. Then why are you standing there like a statue while everyone else is running the obstacle course? You think you're special. You think the rules don't apply to you. No, sir. Then move. Sarah jogged to the starting line of the obstacle course where a rope wall loomed 20 feet high. She made it halfway up before deliberately letting her grip slip, sliding back down with rope burns that would have made a civilian cry out. She didn't make a sound. That was mistake number 1. Reeves noticed immediately. Well, little Jessica doesn't cry. Maybe you're tougher than you look." He got close again, his voice dropping to something that might have been meant as encouragement but came out as threat. "Or maybe you're just stupid. Smart people know when they're beat. Smart people quit before they get hurt. Which one are you, Reed?" "I'm not a quitter, sir." "We'll see about that." By the end of the first day, 3 recruits had dropped out. By the end of the first week, that number had climbed to 12. Reeves didn't just push, he targeted finding each person's weakness and exploiting it with surgical precision. The overweight recruit who couldn't run. The former high school athlete whose ego couldn't handle being average. The nervous kid who couldn't take being yelled at. And Jessica Reed, who was too small, too weak, too female to belong. Sarah endured it all with the same carefully crafted expression of determined struggle. She made friends with the other recruits, learning their stories, their motivations, their fears. Most of them were kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, who joined because they didn't know what else to do with their lives. A few were older, looking for purpose after civilian jobs that had left them feeling empty. None of them were infiltrators. Sarah had been certain of that by day 3. But she continued her assessment, documenting every security flaw, every procedural gap, every moment when someone should have questioned something and didn't. Like when Jessica Reed's medical records showed no previous injuries, but Sarah had a small scar on her left shoulder from a bullet wound in Fallujah. The medical screening should have caught that, should have asked about it, didn't. Or when her fingerprints, which were in the system under her real identity as Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell, weren't flagged as already existing in the military database. The background check should have caught that, should have raised red flags, didn't. Or when she demonstrated hand-to-hand combat techniques during defensive tactics training that were far beyond what a civilian should know. The instructor should have questioned that. Should have wondered where a mall security guard learned Krav Maga. Didn't. The system was broken. And Sarah was proving it, one failure at a time. Marcus Chen couldn't let it go. He'd spent 3 weeks investigating Jessica Reed using every tool available to naval intelligence without crossing the line into official surveillance. He'd reviewed every piece of her documentation. He'd run facial recognition against the national database. He'd even called her supposed previous employer at the mall in Richmond and spoken to the security supervisor who'd given her a reference. Everything checked out. Everything made sense. Except it didn't. On Wednesday of week 3, Marcus made a decision that could end his career. He accessed the classified personnel database, the one that required special authorization, and left a digital trail of everyone who queried it and ran Jessica Reed's fingerprints against military records. The computer processed for 30 seconds. Then the screen flashed red. Match found. Identity: Mitchell Sarah J. Rank: Rear Admiral lower half security clearance. Top secret CI current assignment classified. Marcus stared at the screen, his brain refusing to process what he was seeing. Jessica Reed was a Rear Admiral, a flag officer, one of the highest-ranking women in the United States Navy. And she was currently standing in the rain on the parade ground getting screamed at by a staff sergeant for not running fast enough. His phone rang. The number on the screen was blocked. Lieutenant Chen. The voice on the other end was female calm and carried the quiet authority of someone who was used to being obeyed instantly. "This is Vice Admiral Catherine Williams, Naval Intelligence Command. I believe you've just accessed some interesting information." Marcus's blood turned cold. "Ma'am, I can explain." "No explanation necessary, Lieutenant. In fact, I want to commend you. Rear Admiral Mitchell has been undercover at Norfolk for 3 weeks, and you're the first person to identify her." "That's exactly the kind of analytical thinking we need. But now that you know, we need to talk about what happens next." "I don't understand, ma'am. Why would an admiral go undercover as a recruit?" "Because 18 years ago, Admiral Mitchell's mother was killed in a terrorist attack that could have been prevented. A junior Marine had reported suspicious activity 3 times, and 3 times he was ignored because he was too young, too junior, too inexperienced for anyone to take seriously. Admiral Mitchell wants to know if we've learned anything since then, if our security protocols would catch a real infiltrator." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. "And she's documenting our failures. Every single one. But here's the situation, Lieutenant. We have credible intelligence suggesting there may be an actual hostile operative on Norfolk. Someone sophisticated enough to have created a deep cover identity and maintained it for years. Admiral Mitchell went in looking for systemic failures. She may have accidentally stumbled onto a real threat. What do you need from me, ma'am? Keep watching her. Keep analyzing. If you spot anything that suggests a real infiltrator, not Admiral Mitchell, but someone else who doesn't fit the pattern, you report directly to me. Nobody else. Is that clear? Crystal clear, ma'am. The line went dead. Marcus sat in his office staring at the classified file on his screen. Sarah Mitchell had enlisted at 18 immediately after her mother's death. She'd completed Navy SEAL training at 20, becoming one of the first women to earn the Trident. She'd served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia operations so classified that most of the details were redacted even in this high-level file. She'd been promoted to Rear Admiral at 23, the youngest flag officer in naval history. And now she was pretending to be a struggling recruit, letting a staff sergeant spit at her feet and call her pathetic all, to prove that the system that failed her mother was still broken. Marcus pulled up the security camera feeds and started reviewing 3 weeks of footage, looking for patterns, looking for anyone else who moved like an operator, looking for the ghost that Vice Admiral Williams believed was hiding somewhere on this base. The rain had stopped, but the humidity remained, turning Norfolk into a steam bath. Sarah stood in formation with the other recruits, her uniform soaked through with sweat, listening to Reeves deliver another speech about discipline and dedication. She'd heard variations of this speech before, too. They all blurred together after a while. Tomorrow, Reeves announced, we begin live fire exercises. Some of you won't qualify. Some of you will wash out. And some of you, his eyes found Sarah, will prove once and for all that you don't belong here. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she was calculating. Live fire exercises meant they'd be on the range. The range had limited security, multiple entry points, long sight lines that would be advantageous for surveillance or sniper positions. If there was an infiltrator on this base, the range would be an ideal location for an attack. That night, after lights out, Sarah lay in her bunk and reviewed everything she'd observed over the past 3 weeks. She'd identified 47 security vulnerabilities, from blind spots in camera coverage to predictable patrol patterns to doors that were supposed to be locked, but weren't. She'd documented lazy procedures, inattentive personnel, and a general sense of complacency that came from too many years without a serious threat. But she'd also started to notice something else. Small things. Inconsistencies. There was a civilian contractor who had access to areas that civilian contractors shouldn't need to access. There was a supply sergeant whose inventory records didn't quite match the actual supplies. There was a junior officer whose off-base movements didn't align with what he'd reported in his security questionnaire. Any one of these things could be innocent. Sloppy record-keeping, honest mistakes. But all of them together formed a pattern, and Sarah had spent her entire career learning to trust patterns. Tomorrow at the range, she'd be watching more than just the training exercises. She'd be watching everyone, looking for the one person who didn't belong, the one person who moved wrong or looked wrong or reacted wrong, the one person who might be planning something terrible. The sun rose red over Norfolk, the kind of sunrise that old sailors called blood in the morning storm by evening. Sarah stood with her fellow recruits at the rifle range. Each of them issued an M16A4 and 2 magazines of ammunition. Reeves walked the line, checking weapons, correcting grips, barking instructions. When he reached Sarah, he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Reed, you ever fired a weapon before?" "No, sir. Only in video games, sir." The lie was smooth. Sarah had been trained on 17 different weapon systems, from pistols to sniper rifles to crew-served weapons. She'd killed men at ranges from 3 feet to 800 meters. But Jessica Reed from Richmond, who worked at a mall, had never touched a gun. "Video games." Reeves laughed. "Well, video games don't have recoil, Reed. Video games don't have the smell of gunpowder or the kick that'll break your shoulder if you don't brace right. Video games don't show you what a bullet actually does to a human body." He gestured to the target range. "You're going to fire 30 rounds at that target. Military qualification requires 23 hits out of 30. You'll be lucky to hit 15. "I'll do my best, sir." "Your best isn't good enough. It never will be." The rangemaster called the line to order. Sarah took her position, settled the rifle against her shoulder with the deliberately clumsy uncertainty of someone who'd never done this before, and sighted down the barrel at the target 50 meters away. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. The round struck the target dead center. Again, center mass. Again, center mass. She could feel Reeves staring at her, could feel his confusion building. She'd made a mistake. She'd been too focused on watching the perimeter looking for threats, and she'd forgotten to miss. Quickly, she adjusted, letting her next 3 shots drift wide, then back to center, then wide again, creating a pattern that looked like someone struggling with recoil and aim, not someone who could put 30 rounds through the same hole at 5 times this distance. By the time she'd fired all 30 rounds, she'd scored exactly 23 hits, the minimum to qualify. Reeves approached her, his expression unreadable. "Lucky," he said finally. "That's all that was. Beginner's luck. Won't happen again." But Sarah saw the doubt in his eyes, the first crack in his certainty. And in that moment, she saw something else. A civilian contractor 50 meters away, standing near the ammunition storage bunker, talking on a cell phone. Cell phones weren't supposed to be used on the range. It was a safety violation. A security violation. The contractor saw her looking. For just a second, their eyes met. And Sarah recognized something in that gaze, the professional assessment of a predator evaluating a threat. The contractor turned away, finished the phone call, and walked toward the parking area. Sarah memorized every detail: height, weight, gait, the way he favored his left leg slightly, the military watch on his wrist that didn't match the casual contractor image he was projecting. She'd found him. After 3 weeks of searching, she'd found her ghost. Now she just had to prove it before he did whatever he'd been sent here to do. Marcus Chen received the security footage at 1400 hours. It came from an encrypted email account. No sender name, just a video file and a single line of text: ammunition bunker contractor, check credentials. Marcus opened the file and watched a civilian contractor standing near the range's ammunition storage, talking on a cell phone, looking directly at someone off camera. He pulled up the security logs for the range that day and cross-referenced them with the contractor database. The contractor's name was Michael Thompson. Background check clean. Security clearance valid. Employment history 5 years with Davis Defense Contractors, working on-base maintenance and logistics. Everything legitimate. Marcus ran the same checks he'd run on Jessica Reed, looking for the telltale signs of a manufactured identity. Thompson's social media presence looked organic, posts going back 7 years. Friends and family who responded naturally, photos from vacations and holidays. His credit history showed normal patterns of spending. His tax returns were filed on time. But there was something. A small inconsistency. Thompson's security clearance had been issued 5 years ago, processed through the standard channels. But when Marcus dug deeper, he found that the background investigator who'd processed Thompson's clearance had retired 6 months after issuing it. Not unusual, except that same investigator had processed 14 other clearances in his final 6 months, and 7 of those individuals were now working at various high-security installations across the country. All of them legitimate, all of them clean, or all of them part of a network that had been carefully constructed over 5 years, waiting for the right moment to activate. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed the number Vice Admiral Williams had given him. "Ma'am," he said when she answered, "I think we have a problem." Sarah stood in Reeves's office at 1600 hours, called in for what he termed a performance review. The office was small, cluttered with training manuals and motivational posters that were probably supposed to inspire, but mostly just looked tired. Reeves sat behind his desk, his expression hovering somewhere between suspicious and confused. "Reed, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Have you had prior weapons training?" "No, sir." "Don't lie to me, recruit. That shooting today, that wasn't beginner's luck. That was muscle memory. That was training." Sarah kept her face neutral, her voice steady. "Sir, I grew up watching war movies with my dad. Maybe I picked up more than I thought." "War movies." Reeves leaned back in his chair. "You know what I think, Reed? I think you're hiding something. I think you're not who you claim to be. And I'm going to figure out what you're really doing on my base. The moment stretched out. Sarah could tell him the truth right now. Could pull out her identification watch, his face go white, end this entire operation. But if she did that, she'd lose her chance to catch Thompson. She'd lose her chance to prove that the system was still broken, still vulnerable, still getting people killed. Sir, I'm just a recruit trying to serve my country. That's all I've ever wanted. Reeves stared at her for a long moment. Get out of my office. But Reed, I'm watching you. One wrong move and you're gone. Sarah saluted and left her mind already racing ahead. Thompson would move soon. That phone call at the range had been coordination with someone. An attack was coming, and she had to figure out when and where before Reeves's suspicion compromised her investigation. She had maybe 24 hours before everything fell apart. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She'd requisitioned a laptop under the pretense of working on administrative paperwork, and now she sat in the recruit barracks bathroom, the only place with decent Wi-Fi signal hacking into the base's security network. It wasn't difficult. The firewalls were outdated, the passwords weak, the security protocols designed by people who'd never considered that someone might actually try to breach them. She was inside the system in under 10 minutes. She pulled up contractor access logs for the past 6 months. Thompson had been on base 147 times with legitimate work orders for each visit. But the pattern of his visits was interesting. He came on the same days every week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, except for 7 occasions when he'd come on different days. Sarah cross-referenced those dates with base operations. All 7 irregular visits had coincided with major training exercises. Times when security attention was focused on the exercises, not on routine contractor activity. Times when someone could move around the base without drawing attention. Times when someone could plant surveillance devices, map out vulnerabilities, prepare for an attack. Sarah pulled up tomorrow's schedule. Another major training exercise. Live fire drills with multiple units. VIP visitors from Washington observing the training. Maximum personnel, maximum confusion, maximum opportunity. If Thompson was going to move, it would be tomorrow. She sent an encrypted message to Vice Admiral Williams's secure line. Threat imminent. Recommend action. Then she cleared her browsing history, wiped the laptop's memory, and returned to her bunk. Around her, the other recruits slept, unaware that somewhere on this base, someone was planning to kill them. Unaware that the weak little girl in the bunk across from them was the only thing standing between them and disaster. Sarah lay in the darkness, running through scenarios, calculating odds, preparing for every possible outcome. She'd spent 18 years getting ready for this moment. 18 years proving that being underestimated was the greatest advantage a warrior could have. Tomorrow, Staff Sergeant Marcus Reeves was going to learn exactly who Jessica Reed really was, and it was going to terrify him. The alarm went off at full 4:45 hours, pulling Sarah from a sleep that had never really come. Around her, recruits groaned and stumbled out of their bunks, moving with the sluggish confusion of people who hadn't yet adjusted to military hours. Sarah was already dressed. Her boots laced her mind, running through the tactical assessment she'd completed during the night. Thompson would strike during the chaos of the training exercise. Maximum casualties, maximum impact. That's what these operations always aimed for. Not just body count, but psychological devastation that would ripple through the entire military community. "Reed, you look like hell," one of the other recruits muttered as they filed toward the showers. Her name was Amanda Chen, no relation to Lieutenant Marcus Chen, and she'd been kind to Sarah since day one, the way good people were kind to those they perceived as weaker. "Couldn't sleep," Sarah said, maintaining the Jessica Reed persona, even though every instinct screamed at her to drop the act and start mobilizing a response team. "Nervous about today. I heard we're doing urban combat drills. Live rounds, smoke grenades, the whole thing." Amanda's voice carried excitement mixed with fear. She was 19, fresh out of high school, still young enough to think war was adventure instead of horror. Sarah remembered being 19. Remembered thinking she could save everyone if she just tried hard enough. That optimism had died somewhere between Fallujah and Kandahar, buried along with friends whose names she still whispered when the nightmares came. "I'll be fine," Sarah said, the words automatic. "You're tougher than you look, you know that." Amanda smiled. Reeves tries to break you every single day, and you just keep coming back. That takes guts. Guts. If Amanda only knew. But she wouldn't know, not if Sarah did her job right. None of these kids would know how close they'd come to dying until it was over, and Sarah was long gone, just another recruit who'd washed out and disappeared. The barracks door slammed open. Reeves stood in the entrance, his expression darker than usual. Formation in 5 minutes. Anyone who's late runs 10 miles before breakfast. Move. Sarah moved with the others, her hands steady as she gathered her gear. The M16 they'd been issued yesterday was locked in the armory, but she'd requisitioned a cleaning kit and taken it to her bunk. Inside that cleaning kit, hidden beneath the brushes and oil, was a compact Sig Sauer P365 that she'd smuggled onto base in pieces over 3 weeks. Reassembled last night, loaded with hollow points that would stop a threat without over-penetration that might hit bystanders. If Thompson moved today, Sarah would be ready. The formation assembled on the parade ground as dawn broke over Norfolk, turning the sky the color of bruised flesh. 40 recruits stood at attention while Reeves paced in front of them like a predator selecting prey. Today you learn whether you have what it takes to be warriors or whether you're just playing dress-up in uniforms you don't deserve. His voice carried across the grounds sharp enough to cut. We're running a combat scenario. Urban environment. Hostile forces. Live ammunition. Some of you will freeze. Some of you will panic. Some of you will prove me right when I said you don't belong here. His eyes found Sarah. Always found her. Reed, front and center. Sarah stepped forward, her heart rate steady at 60 beats per minute. She'd learned years ago how to control her body's fear response, how to convince her nervous system that walking into danger was no different than walking into a grocery store. Reeves circled her slowly. I've been thinking about you, Reed. About that shooting yesterday. About the way you move. About the way you never complain, never cry, never break. He stopped in front of her. Most recruits crack by week 3, but not you. Why is that? I want this, sir. Want what? Want to be a sailor? Want to serve, or want something else entirely? He leaned close, his voice dropping so only she could hear. I pulled your file last night, Reed. Called your previous employer. Talked to your supervisor at that mall. You know what he told me? Sarah's pulse ticked up to 65. This was it. The moment everything collapsed. He told me you were the best security guard he ever had. Said you had instincts like you'd been doing it your whole life. Said you caught a shoplifter once who turned out to be carrying a concealed weapon and you disarmed him before the cops even arrived. Reeves's eyes bored into hers. That's some impressive training for a civilian who never served. Self-defense classes, sir. My father taught me to be careful. Your father. Reeves nodded slowly. The one who died of cancer. Except I called the hospital listed in your file, and they have no record of anyone by that name dying there. Funny, isn't it? How your story has all these little holes in it. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. Reeves was smarter than she'd given him credit for. He'd done actual investigation, not just accepted the fabricated documentation. That was either very good because it meant the military was getting better at catching infiltrators, or very bad because it meant her cover was about to be blown before she could stop Thompson. Sir, there must be some mistake with the records. Don't. Reeves cut her off, his voice flat. Don't insult my intelligence with more lies. I don't know who you are or what you're doing on my base, but I'm about to find out. After this exercise, you and I are going to have a long conversation with base security. Whatever game you're playing ends today. He turned to address the formation. Mount up, we roll out in 10. Sarah climbed into the transport truck with the other recruits, her mind calculating rapidly. Reeves would report her after the exercise. That gave her maybe 3 hours. 3 hours to identify Thompson's target, intercept him, and stop whatever attack he'd planned. 3 hours before her mission failed, and the system she'd come to fix remained broken. Amanda sat next to her in the truck, her young face tight with concern. Reed, what was that about? Are you in trouble? It's nothing. Just a misunderstanding. It didn't look like nothing. Reeves looked like he wanted to arrest you. Sarah glanced at her fellow recruit, This 19-year-old kid who'd probably joined the Navy because she didn't know what else to do with her life. Amanda would survive this. She'd wash out or graduate, serve her time, get out, and live a normal life. She'd never know how close she came to dying because the system failed. Because people like Thompson slipped through gaps that people like Sarah spent their lives trying to close. Amanda, Sarah said quietly, if something happens today, if things get weird, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? What do you mean if something happens? Just promise me, no questions, just follow my lead. Amanda stared at her for a long moment, confusion and fear warring in her expression. Okay, I promise. The truck convoy rolled through Norfolk's training grounds past empty buildings that had been converted into urban warfare simulation environments. Windows had been blown out and replaced with ballistic glass. Doors hung at odd angles. Walls were pocked with simulated bullet damage. It looked like every Middle Eastern city Sarah had ever fought in, which was the point. Lieutenant Marcus Chen stood at the training ground entrance watching the convoy approach. Sarah saw him, immediately recognized him from her surveillance as the junior intelligence officer who'd been too curious for his own good. His presence here wasn't coincidental. He'd been assigned to observe, which meant either he'd identified her or he'd identified Thompson. Either way, it complicated everything. The truck stopped. Recruits filed out and assembled in their designated positions. Sarah made sure to stay in the middle of the formation, unremarkable, just another nervous recruit preparing for her first live fire exercise. Reeves stood before them, flanked by 2 other drill instructors and 3 range safety officers. Listen up, the scenario is simple. Hostile forces have occupied this urban area. Your mission is to clear the buildings and secure the objective. You'll be divided into 4 squads. Each squad gets 1 instructor as advisor. Live ammunition will be issued. Rules of engagement are simple. Don't shoot each other. Don't shoot civilians. Do shoot the targets. Any questions? A recruit in the front row raised his hand. Sir, how do we know who the targets are? The targets are clearly marked with orange vests. If it's not wearing orange, don't shoot it. Clear. Clear, sir. Sarah scanned the area methodically. 4 buildings, multiple windows, at least a dozen positions where a sniper could set up. The ammunition depot was 200 meters to the east within range for any competent marksman with a Barrett or similar long-range rifle. The command tent where the VIP observers would be stationed was positioned north, exposed on 3 sides. Thompson would hit one of those 2 locations. Maximum casualties or maximum political impact. Sarah just had to figure out which. Reeves called out squad assignments. Sarah ended up in Squad 3 with Amanda and 8 other recruits. Their advisor was a gunnery sergeant named Rodriguez who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Stay close, stay quiet, don't die, Rodriguez muttered as he handed out ammunition magazines. If you make it through this without shooting yourself or your buddies, I'll consider it a successful day. Sarah loaded her M16 with practiced efficiency, then deliberately fumbled it to maintain her cover. The SIG in her waistband pressed against her spine, a comforting weight that no one else knew about. Marcus Chen approached Squad 3, his expression carefully neutral. Staff Sergeant Reeves asked me to observe your squad's performance. I'll be following at a distance. Pretend I'm not here. His eyes met Sarah's for just a fraction of a second. In that moment, she understood. He knew. He'd figured out who she was, and he was positioning himself to provide support if things went bad. The whistle blew. The exercise began. Squad 3 moved into the first building with the careful coordination of people who'd been drilled on room-clearing procedures but had never actually done it under pressure. Rodriguez called out instructions, his voice calm and professional, guiding them through doorways and up stairwells. Sarah moved with deliberate mediocrity, letting others take point, staying in the middle of the formation where Jessica Reed belonged. But her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every shadow, every sound, every detail that didn't fit the pattern. The first shot came from Building 2. Not the crack of a rifle round, but the sharp bark of a pistol. Then another. Then screaming. Rodriguez froze. That's not part of the scenario. Those aren't blanks. Sarah was already moving, dropping the Jessica Reed persona like a shed skin. She sprinted toward the sound of gunfire, her M16 up and ready. her mind shifting into combat mode with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 100 times before. "Reed! Get back here!" Rodriguez shouted behind her, but Sarah was gone, flowing through the urban terrain with lethal grace. She reached Building 2's entrance and paused, listening. 2 shooters inside, maybe 3. Suppressed weapons, which meant professionals. The screaming had stopped, which meant casualties. Marcus Chen appeared at her shoulder, breathing hard, his sidearm drawn. "Admiral?" "Not now, Lieutenant." Sarah's voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of someone who'd compartmentalized fear into a box she'd deal with later. "How many hostiles?" "Unknown. 2 victims confirmed down, recruits from Squad 1. 2 kids dead because Sarah hadn't moved fast enough." The rage started small, a cold ember in her chest, but she pushed it down. Rage made you sloppy. Rage got more people killed. "Cover the entrance. Nobody comes out unless it's me or a recruit. Clear." "Crystal, ma'am." Sarah entered the building low and fast, moving through the fatal funnel of the doorway in less than a second. The interior was dark, lit only by dusty sunlight through shattered windows. Blood on the floor still wet. Footprints leading up the stairs. She flowed up the stairwell like water, silent and quick. On the second floor she heard voices. 2 men speaking in Russian. "Sector Chist, Переходим к следующей фазе." The sector is clear. Moving to next phase. Sarah understood Russian. Had to after spending 3 years hunting Russian-backed militants across Syria. She pressed herself against the wall, listening as the 2 men discussed their timeline. They had 20 minutes before Phase 2, whatever that was, began. They needed to eliminate the remaining witnesses and extract before response teams arrived. They didn't know that a response team was already here. They didn't know that the little girl they'd dismissed as no threat was a Navy SEAL Admiral with 17 confirmed kills in close quarters combat. Sarah rounded the corner. The first hostile had his back to her, focused on a doorway where recruits were probably hiding. He never heard her coming. She put 2 rounds through his spine at the T-box, the target point that would sever the spinal cord and drop him instantly without allowing time for a dying reflex that might trigger his weapon. He fell without a sound. The second hostile spun toward her, his weapon coming up fast, too fast. Sarah threw herself sideways as his shot stitched the wall where she'd been standing. She rolled, came up firing her rounds, catching him center mass. He wore body armor. The impacts staggered him but didn't drop him. Sarah adjusted her aim and put one through his face. He went down hard. She moved to the doorway where the first hostile had been focused. 3 recruits cowered inside their faces, white with shock. One of them was Amanda. "Stay here," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying authority that made them obey without question. "Don't move until I come back." "Reed," Amanda's voice shook. Who are you?" "Someone who's going to keep you alive. Stay here." Sarah moved to the 2 dead hostiles and searched them quickly. Russian military identification, but old, dated 2019. Former Spetsnaz, probably who'd gone private sector after the sanctions made legitimate employment impossible. They were hired muscle, not true believers, which meant someone else was running this operation. She found a radio on the first hostile's vest, pulled the earpiece out and pressed it to her ear. Voices speaking Russian giving status updates. "Team 1 secured, proceeding to Phase 2. Team 2 in position, awaiting signal." "Command, this is Team 3, we have a problem." Sarah keyed the radio, letting the background noise transmit without speaking. The handler on the other end would hear the silence and know something was wrong. They'd move up their timeline. She had maybe 10 minutes now. Sarah ran back down the stairs, finding Marcus Chen still covering the entrance. "Lieutenant, get those recruits out of here. Medical evac now, then lock down this training ground. Nobody in or out." "Ma'am, I don't have authority." "You do now. I'm giving it to you. Make the call." She didn't wait for his response. She was already moving toward Building 4, where her tactical assessment said the sniper would be positioned. Thompson wasn't muscle. He was the coordinator, the intelligence asset who'd spent 5 years mapping this base and identifying vulnerabilities. He'd be an overwatch controlling the operation from a position where he could observe and adjust. Building 4's roof. It had to be. Sarah covered the 200 meters in 40 seconds. her body moving with the efficiency of someone who'd trained for endurance under stress. She entered Building 4 through a side door that should have been locked but wasn't another security failure she'd document if she survived this. The stairwell was empty. She climbed quickly, listening for movement above. At the roof access, she paused. The door was closed but not locked. Fresh scratches on the handle where someone had picked it recently. Sarah took a breath, centered herself, and kicked the door open. Thompson stood 20 feet away, a Barrett M107 rifle on a bipod, pointed toward the command tent, where VIP observers had started arriving. He spun toward her, his hand dropping toward a sidearm on his hip. "Don't," Sarah said, her M16 trained on his center mass. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Thompson froze, then slowly raised his hands. His face was calm, professionally neutral. "You're making a mistake. I'm a cleared contractor. I have authorization to be here. You have authorization to plant surveillance equipment and coordinate an attack on U.S. military personnel. That's new." His expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm doing maintenance on the communications array." He gestured toward a panel on the roof that did in fact house communications equipment. Sarah moved closer, keeping her weapon trained on him. "Communications array, right. That's why you have a Barrett 50 cal and 2 dead Spetsnaz operatives in Building 2. Makes perfect sense. I heard gunfire. I came up here to assess the situation. With a sniper rifle. Found it on the roof. Was about to report it." Sarah almost laughed. He was good. Under different circumstances, she might have respected the smooth professionalism of his lies. But she'd spent 3 weeks documenting his movements, 3 weeks watching him prepare this operation, and she was done playing games. "Michael Thompson, except that's not your real name, is it? Your real name is probably something Russian. Probably something your handler gave you when they sent you here 5 years ago to establish deep cover and wait for orders." Sarah kept her voice conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "Want to know how I know? Because I've been you. I've run those operations. I know how they work." Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his professional mask. "Who are you?" "Someone who's going to give you exactly one chance to surrender. Put your hands behind your head, interlace your fingers, and get on your knees. Now." For a moment, Sarah thought he'd comply. His hands moved toward his head, his body shifting into a position of surrender. She relaxed fractionally, preparing to move in and secure him. That's when he moved. Thompson's hand flashed down toward his sidearm faster than she'd anticipated. Sarah fired, but he was already diving behind the communications array, using it as cover. Her rounds sparked off metal, missing flesh by inches. He returned fire, forcing her to drop behind the roof access structure. Bullets chewed through concrete, filling the air with dust and fragments. "You're trapped," Sarah called out, ejecting her spent magazine and loading a fresh one. "There's no extraction coming. Your team is dead or dying. Surrender now, and you might live." "So might you," Thompson shot back. "Phase 2 is already in motion. You stopped nothing." Phase 2. Sarah's blood turned cold. What had she missed? What part of the operation hadn't she accounted for? The answer hit her like a physical blow. The ammunition depot. While everyone was focused on the training exercise on the dead recruits and the active shooters, someone was hitting the ammunition depot. Not to steal anything, to destroy it. To create an explosion that would level half the base and kill hundreds. Sarah made a decision. She couldn't wait Thompson out. She didn't have time. She stood up and ran straight at him, firing as she moved. Aggression in close quarters combat often beat precision because people's brains weren't wired to expect someone to charge directly into gunfire. Thompson got off 2 shots. One went wide. The other caught Sarah in the left shoulder, punching through muscle and exiting cleanly. The impact spun her, but she kept moving, kept firing, emptied her entire magazine into the communications array where he'd taken cover. He fell out of cover, trying to retreat his weapon up. Sarah dropped her empty M16 and drew the SIG from her waistband in one smooth motion. She put 3 rounds into his chest before he could line up his shot. Thompson went down. Not dead, the body armor stopped the rounds, but hurt and disoriented. Sarah kicked his weapon away and stood over him, the SIG pressed against his forehead. Phase 2, she said, her voice tight with pain from the shoulder wound. Where how many? Thompson laughed, blood on his teeth. Too late. It's done. Sarah pulled out her radio and keyed Marcus Chen's frequency. Lieutenant, the ammunition depot. Right now. They're going to blow it. Static. Then, copy. Already moving units to intercept. Admiral, are you? I'm fine. Stop that explosion. She zip-tied Thompson's hands, then ripped his radio earpiece out and put it in her own ear. The Russian voices were frantic now, confused about why their coordinator had gone silent. Good. Confusion bred mistakes. Command to try status. Command demanding Team 3's status. Sarah keyed the radio and spoke in fluent Russian, her accent perfect from years of practice. Team 3 encountering resistance. Phase 2 may be compromised. Recommend abort and extract. Silence on the line. Then negative. Phase 2 proceeds as planned. Teams 4 and 5 execute now. Teams 4 and 5. Thompson had told the truth about one thing. She'd stopped nothing. The operation was bigger than she'd realized. More teams, more attackers, more targets. Sarah ran for the roof edge, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, ignoring the blood soaking through her uniform. From this vantage point, she could see the entire training ground. Building 2, where she'd killed the first 2 hostiles. The command tent, where VIPs were scrambling for cover. The ammunition depot, where the explosion lit up the eastern horizon like a small sun. Sarah watched in horror as the ammunition depot erupted a rolling fireball that mushroomed into the sky. The shockwave hit seconds later, strong enough to stagger her even at this distance. Secondary explosions followed as stored ordnance cooked off each one, a thunderous boom that rattled her bones. She'd been too slow, too focused on Thompson. She'd failed. But then she saw something that made her breath catch. The explosion was contained. The fireball hadn't spread beyond the depot's reinforced walls. The blast barriers she'd seen during her security assessment, the ones she'd noted as actually functional, had done their job. The explosion was catastrophic, but localized. Marcus Chen's voice crackled over the radio. Admiral Depot is secured. Team 4 neutralized before they could complete placement. Charges went off, but damage is contained. No casualties. Sarah's legs almost gave out. No casualties. Chen had moved fast enough, had trusted her intelligence and acted without waiting for authorization, had done what the system was supposed to do, listened to the person on the ground with the best information. Lieutenant status on Teams 4 and 5. Team 4 all dead or captured. Team 5. He paused and Sarah heard gunfire in the background. Team 5 is engaging near the barracks. Their admiral, they're going after the recruits still in the barracks. Kids who weren't part of the exercise. The barracks where recruits slept, where they ate, where they felt safe, where Amanda and the other survivors from Building 2 would have been taken for medical evaluation. Sarah was moving before she consciously decided to move, flowing down the stairs through the building across the training ground. Her shoulder screamed with every step, blood running down her arm, but she'd been hurt worse. She'd survived worse. Behind her, Thompson called out weakly, "You can't save them all. You'll die trying." Maybe. But she'd made a promise 18 years ago at her mother's funeral. She'd promised to make sure no one else lost their father, their mother, their child, because the system failed to protect them. She'd kept that promise before. She'd keep it again, even if it killed her. The barracks was 400 meters away, and Sarah covered the distance in under 2 minutes, despite the bullet wound leaking blood down her left arm. Her radio crackled with frantic voices. Base security mobilizing medical teams, responding officers trying to understand what the hell was happening on their supposedly secure installation. She keyed Marcus Chen's frequency while running. "Lieutenant, I'm approaching the barracks from the south. Don't let your people shoot me." "Copy that. Admiral Team 5 is inside. At least 4 hostiles, maybe more. They've barricaded the main entrance and have hostages." Hostages. The word hit Sarah like a fist. These weren't soldiers. They were kids barely out of high school who'd signed up to serve their country and now found themselves in the middle of a coordinated terrorist attack because the system had failed them exactly the way it had failed her mother. Sarah reached the barracks perimeter and pressed herself against the exterior wall, breathing hard. The SIG was still in her hand, warm from the rounds she'd put into Thompson. Her M16 was somewhere on a rooftop with an empty magazine. She had 17 rounds left in the SIG and whatever she could improvise, against 4 trained operatives, maybe more. The odds weren't good, but odds had never stopped her before. She moved along the wall to a side window and risked a glance inside. The barracks common area was chaos, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and 3 bodies on the floor. Sarah's stomach clenched as she recognized one of them, Rodriguez, the gunnery sergeant who'd been advising her squad. Half his face was gone. He'd died trying to protect his recruits. 4 hostiles visible, all wearing civilian clothes, but moving with military precision. They had the remaining recruits, Sarah counted 8, maybe 9, corralled in the corner. Most of the kids were crying. One was praying. Amanda sat among them, her face pale but determined, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for a way out. Smart girl. Sarah had chosen the right person to trust. The lead hostile was speaking into a radio, his Russian accent thick enough that Sarah could hear it through the glass. Command, we have 9 hostages secured. Recommend extraction protocol Alpha. The response was immediate. Negative. Protocol has changed. Execute hostages and extract. Do not leave witnesses. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They were going to kill those kids, not as leverage, not as political statement, just to cover their tracks. She had maybe 60 seconds before they started executing. Sarah pulled back from the window and keyed her radio. Chen, they're about to kill the hostages. I'm going in. Have medical standing by. Admiral, wait for backup. Sarah switched off the radio. Backup would arrive in time to count bodies. She'd spent 18 years learning how to operate alone, how to be the backup when backup wasn't coming. This wasn't different just because she was a flag officer now. It was just another day of being the person who did what needed doing when everyone else was still asking permission. She circled to the barracks kitchen entrance, a side door she'd noted during her initial security assessment as being poorly secured. The lock was cheap civilian grade. She kicked it in with one solid hit and flowed inside the SIG, up and tracking. The kitchen was empty but led directly into the common area where the hostiles held their captives. Sarah moved through it like smoke, silent and quick. Through the doorway she could see the lead hostile raising his weapon toward Amanda's head. Nachanayam Seti, he said. We start with this one. Sarah stepped into the doorway and fired twice. The first round took the lead hostile in the temple. The second caught the man next to him in the throat. Both dropped before the others could react. The remaining 2 hostiles spun toward her weapons, coming up fast. Sarah was already moving, diving behind an overturned table as their rounds chewed through the wood. The recruit screamed. Someone was shouting her name. Amanda's voice high and terrified. Stay down, Sarah called out, then rolled left and came up firing. 1 round, 2, 3. The third hostile took a hit to the chest and went down. Not dead body armor again, but hurt enough to stop shooting. The fourth hostile was smarter. He'd grabbed a recruit, a kid named Davis, who couldn't have been more than 18, and was using him as a shield. The hostile's pistol was pressed against Davis's head, and his eyes met Sarah's with cold calculation. Drop weapon, he said in heavily accented English. Drop now or boy dies. Sarah kept her SIG trained on the hostile, her mind running through options. At this range, she could probably make the shot. Probably. But probably meant Davis might die, and Sarah had already buried too many kids who'd died because someone made a tactical calculation that turned out wrong. Okay, Sarah said, keeping her voice calm. Okay. I'm putting it down. She slowly lowered the SIG toward the floor. The hostile smiled. That's when Sarah saw Amanda moving behind him, slowly picking up a piece of broken furniture, a chair leg heavy and solid. The girl's hands were shaking, but her face was set with determination that Sarah recognized. The determination of someone who'd decided they weren't going to be a victim anymore. Sarah met Amanda's eyes for just a fraction of a second and gave the smallest nod. Then she deliberately dropped the SIG, letting it clatter on the floor, drawing the hostile's attention downward for just an instant. Amanda swung the chair leg with everything she had. It caught the hostile across the back of his head with a solid crack. He staggered, his grip on Davis loosening. Sarah was already moving, covering the distance in 3 steps. She grabbed the hostile's gun hand, twisted it away from Davis, and drove her elbow into his face with enough force to shatter his nose. He went down hard, and Sarah stomped on his wrist until his fingers released the weapon. Then she picked up her cig and put one round through his kneecap. He wasn't going anywhere. The barracks fell silent, except for the sound of crying and heavy breathing. Sarah stood there, her wounded shoulder throbbing, her uniform soaked with blood, looking at the 8 terrified recruits huddled in the corner, looking at Amanda, who still held the chair leg in shaking hands. "You did good," Sarah told her. "You saved his life." Amanda dropped the chair leg and started crying, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. Davis pulled her into a hug, both of them trembling. The other recruits just stared at Sarah like she was something alien, something they couldn't quite process. "Reed," one of them said. "What? How did you? Who are you?" Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the barracks door burst open and Reeves charged in with 4 MPs, weapons drawn. He took in the scene, the dead bodies, the wounded hostile, the crying recruits, and Sarah standing in the middle of it all, covered in blood and holding a pistol that definitely wasn't military issue. His face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, confusion, rage, and finally something that might have been recognition. "Jessica Reed," he said slowly. "Or should I call you something else?" Sarah reached into her uniform pocket, moving slowly so the MPs didn't shoot her, and pulled out her military ID. She tossed it to Reeves. He caught it, looked at it, and went pale. "Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell, Naval Special Warfare Command." His voice was flat, emotionless. "You're a flag officer." "I am." "You've been undercover on my base for 3 weeks." "I have." "Letting me treat you like—" He couldn't finish the sentence. His hands were shaking. "Why?" "Because 18 years ago my mother was killed in a terrorist attack that could have been prevented. A junior Marine reported suspicious activity 3 times, and 3 times command dismissed him because he was too young, too junior, too inexperienced to be taken seriously." Sarah's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with old pain. "I needed to know if we'd learned anything, if the system would catch a sophisticated infiltrator, if someone like my mother would still die because we're too arrogant to listen to the people on the ground." Reeves stared at her. "And did we learn anything?" "You tell me." "A terrorist cell spent 5 years establishing deep cover on this base. They had access to sensitive areas. They mapped our vulnerabilities. They coordinated an attack that killed 2 recruits and could have killed hundreds more. And nobody noticed until I showed up pretending to be a 22-year-old civilian and started documenting your failures." The words hit Reeves like physical blows. He looked at the dead bodies, at the terrified recruits, at Rodriguez's corpse, still cooling on the floor. "Gunny Rodriguez," he said quietly. "He was a good Marine. He died protecting his people. That makes him better than good." Sarah's shoulder was screaming now, the adrenaline wearing off and letting the pain through. "Staff Sergeant, I need you to secure these hostiles, get these recruits to medical, and lock down this entire base. Nobody moves without authorization. We don't know if there are more cells activated." "Ma'am, you're wounded. I need you to follow orders, Staff Sergeant. Can you do that?" Reeves's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because in about 30 seconds, this base is going to be swarming with federal agents, counterintelligence teams, and half the Pentagon asking questions. I need you to be ready to give them answers." As if on cue, Sarah's radio erupted with chatter. Vice Admiral Catherine Williams' voice cut through the noise. "Admiral Mitchell, this is Williams. I'm inbound with a full response team. ETA 10 minutes. What's your status?" Sarah keyed her radio. 5 hostiles neutralized, 1 detained for interrogation. 2 recruits, KIA, multiple wounded. Base is compromised, but situation is contained. Ma'am, we need to assume there are more cells in place across other installations. This wasn't just about Norfolk." "Agreed. FBI is already mobilizing. We're rolling up every contact Thompson had over the past 5 years." Williams paused. "Admiral, are you injured?" "Flesh wound. I'll live." "That wasn't what I asked." Sarah looked down at her blood-soaked uniform. "Gunshot wound to the left shoulder. Through and through. I need stitches and antibiotics, but I can function." "Get to medical." "That's an order." "After debriefing, ma'am." "Now, Admiral, you've done enough for one day." Sarah wanted to argue, but the truth was she was running on fumes. She'd been awake for nearly 36 hours, had been shot, and had killed 4 people in close quarters combat. Her hands were starting to shake with delayed shock, and her vision was getting fuzzy around the edges. "Aye, ma'am," she said finally. Reeves gestured to one of the MPs. "Escort the Admiral to medical. Stay with her until the medics clear her." The MP moved to Sarah's side carefully, not touching her injured shoulder. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me." Sarah started toward the door, then stopped and turned back to Amanda. The young woman was still being held by Davis, both of them looking like they'd aged a decade in the past hour. "Amanda," Sarah said, "what you did back there, using that chair leg to save Davis, that took real courage. Not everyone has that kind of courage when it counts." Amanda wiped her eyes. "I was terrified." Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you're terrified. Sarah recognized the words as soon as she said them. Her father's words spoken to her when she was 8 years old and watching him pack for his final deployment. "You're going to be okay. All of you are going to be okay." "Will you?" Amanda's voice broke. "Will we see you again? Will you tell us what really happened?" Sarah glanced at Reeves, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That's not up to me, but I hope so." She left the barracks with the MP at her side, stepping out into Virginia sunlight that felt surreal after the violence inside. The base was in full lockdown, security teams everywhere, helicopters overhead, armored vehicles positioning at key intersections. In the distance, she could see the smoke rising from the ammunition depot, a black pillar reaching toward the sky. The medical facility was chaos. Wounded recruits being triaged, doctors shouting orders, nurses running between treatment bays. Sarah was directed to a bed in the corner where a tired-looking Navy corpsman started cutting away her uniform to access the shoulder wound. "Jesus," the corpsman muttered. "Ma'am, this needs surgery. The bullet missed your brachial artery by maybe half an inch. You could have bled out." "But I didn't. Clean it, stitch it, give me antibiotics. I've got work to do." "Ma'am, with respect, you need—" "That wasn't a request, corpsman." The young man looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Aye, ma'am. This is going to hurt." It did hurt. The corpsman cleaned the wound with antiseptic that felt like liquid fire, then started stitching with the kind of efficiency that spoke of lots of practice in field conditions. Sarah gritted her teeth and focused on breathing through the pain. She'd been hurt worse. In Fallujah, she'd taken shrapnel from an IED and kept fighting for another 4 hours before anyone noticed she was bleeding. This was nothing. Marcus Chen appeared in the treatment bay doorway, his uniform disheveled and his face carrying the shell-shocked expression of someone who'd just lived through something they'd only trained for in theory. "Admiral, I just got word from Vice Admiral Williams. They've identified 17 more potential operatives across 8 different bases. Full takedown operation is underway. Any connection to Thompson? All of them. The FBI tracked his communications network. Turns out he was the node coordinator for the entire East Coast operation. You didn't just stop one attack, ma'am. You broke their entire network." Sarah absorbed this information while the corpsman tied off another stitch. 17 operatives, 8 bases. If Thompson's cell had succeeded here, it would have been the signal for the others to activate. Coordinated attacks across multiple installations designed to overwhelm response capabilities and create maximum psychological impact. Her mother's death had taught her that the system was broken. Today had proven that it could be fixed if someone was willing to force it to change. "Lieutenant, I need you to compile a complete after-action report. Every security failure, every procedural gap, every moment when someone should have caught something and didn't. I want documentation that's so thorough and so damning that the Pentagon has no choice but to implement real reforms." Chen nodded. "Already on it, ma'am. But I have to ask, why did you do it this way? Why not just come in as an admiral and order a security review?" "Because people lie to admirals. They tell you what you want to hear. They hide problems and blame others and make excuses." Sarah winced as the corpsman started on the exit wound. "But they tell the truth to recruits. They show their real faces to people they think don't matter. I needed to see the truth, not the sanitized version command would have presented." "You could have died. People die every day because systems fail them. If my death would have exposed those failures and saved lives, it would have been worth it." Sarah met his eyes. "That's not bravery, Lieutenant. That's just math." Chen looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could, a commotion at the medical facility entrance made them both turn. Staff Sergeant Reeves was being escorted in by 2 MPs, and he was fighting them every step of the way. "I need to talk to Admiral Mitchell. Get your hands off me." Sarah nodded to the MPs, who reluctantly released him. Reeves crossed the treatment bay in 3 strides, his face twisted with emotions Sarah couldn't entirely read. "You made a fool of me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You let me treat you like garbage for 3 weeks. You let me humiliate you, disrespect you, call you weak and pathetic and everything else I could think of to break you down. Why? For what? To prove some point about how terrible I am." The corpsman had finished stitching and was applying bandages. Sarah sat up, carefully testing the range of motion in her injured shoulder. It hurt like hell, but everything still worked. "Staff Sergeant, you want to know the truth. You weren't wrong about Jessica Reed. She was weak. She was unprepared. She had no business being a sailor." Sarah stood up, meeting Reeves's eyes. "But you were wrong about me. And more importantly, you were wrong about your job. My job is to train recruits. Your job is to identify warriors and prepare them for combat. But you can't identify warriors if you're too busy looking at their size, their gender, their age, their appearance. You judge people by what you think they should be instead of what they actually are." Sarah took a step closer. "There's a 19-year-old woman in that barracks who saved a life today. She swung a chair leg at an armed terrorist because someone needed to act, and she was the only one willing to do it. You know what you would have done with her in training? You would have broken her. You would have told her she was too weak, too scared, too female. And she would have quit, and that kid Davis would be dead right now." Reeves's face had gone pale. You didn't know. That's the problem. You made assumptions based on what people looked like instead of what they were capable of. And those assumptions created blind spots that enemies exploited." Sarah's voice softened slightly. "I'm not here to destroy your career, Staff Sergeant. I'm here to fix a system that got my mother killed. But fixing that system means people like you need to change how you think about strength, capability, and potential. How am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to look at someone and see past—" He gestured helplessly. "You start by listening, by paying attention, by giving people the chance to prove themselves instead of deciding in advance that they can't." Sarah picked up her bloodied uniform jacket, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. "Gunny Rodriguez died protecting his recruits today. You know why he was beloved by every Marine he ever trained, because he saw potential in people others dismissed. He built warriors instead of breaking spirits." Reeves was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "The recruits, the ones who survived, they're asking about you. They want to know what happens next." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth, that you're a flag officer who went undercover to test our security, that you saved their lives." He met her eyes. "Some of them are angry. They feel like you manipulated them, used them." "I did manipulate them. I did use them. That's what this operation required." Sarah didn't flinch from the truth. "If that makes them hate me, I can live with that. Better they hate me and live than die because I wasn't willing to do what needed doing." "And me? Where do I fit in all this?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Reeves had been harsh, sometimes cruel, but he'd also been doing what he'd been trained to do. The system had taught him to weed out the weak, and he'd internalized that lesson so thoroughly that he couldn't see past it anymore. "You're going to help me build something better," Sarah said finally. "You're going to take everything you learned today and use it to train the next generation of instructors. You're going to teach them how to identify real threats instead of convenient targets. And you're going to make sure that Rodriguez didn't die for nothing. What if I can't? What if I'm too set in my ways? Then you'll fail and someone else will take your place. But I don't think you'll fail, Staff Sergeant. I think you're smarter than you've been acting. I think today scared you badly enough that you're ready to change." Before Reeves could respond, Vice Admiral Williams entered the medical facility with an entourage of officers and federal agents. She was in her mid-50s, with the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten their posture. Her eyes swept the treatment bay, taking in Sarah's bandaged shoulder, Reeves's shell-shocked expression, and Chen's nervous hovering. "Admiral Mitchell, Williams said. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Sarah followed Williams outside, away from the chaos of the medical facility. They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the lockdown fading into background noise. "You went off script," Williams said finally. "The plan was intelligence gathering and security assessment, not active combat operations, not killing 5 hostiles and exposing yourself to grave danger. The situation evolved, ma'am. The situation evolved because you pushed it to evolve. You could have called for backup the moment you identified Thompson. You could have let the professionals handle the tactical response." Williams stopped walking and turned to face Sarah. "Instead, you ran into a building full of armed terrorists and fought them alone. That's not intelligence work. That's not even special operations. That's suicide with good luck." Sarah met her superior officer's gaze without flinching. "With respect, ma'am, I am a professional, and those recruits didn't have time for me to wait for backup that would have arrived too late. 2 recruits died anyway." The words hit Sarah like a punch. She'd known it intellectually, had seen Rodriguez's body, had counted the casualties, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way that tactical assessments never could. "Yes, ma'am, they did." Their names were Private First Class Daniel Torres and Private First Class Sarah Kim. Torres was 20 years old, joined up to pay for college. Kim was 19, first in her family to serve. Both dead because we failed to catch infiltrators who'd been on this base for years. Sarah's throat tightened. "I know, ma'am." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're treating this as a success. Mission accomplished. Network disrupted. But 2 kids are dead, and their families are going to get folded flags and condolence letters that don't mean a damn thing. What do you want me to say, ma'am? That I should have moved faster, that I should have caught Thompson earlier, that I should have somehow predicted exactly when and where they'd attack?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "I did everything I could with the information I had. I documented every failure. I identified the threat. I stopped them before they killed hundreds instead of 2. And yes, I wish I could have saved Torres and Kim. I wish I could save everyone. But I can't. Nobody can." Williams was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. "Your mother was Commander Rebecca Mitchell, killed in 2007 when you were 5 years old." "Yes, ma'am." "A Marine named Jake Morrison reported suspicious activity 3 times before the attack. 3 times command dismissed his concerns. After your mother died, Morrison blamed himself for not doing more. He struggled with PTSD, depression, thoughts of suicide. Did you know that—" Sarah's stomach dropped. "No, ma'am, I didn't. He's alive today because someone reached out to him. Someone told him that what happened wasn't his fault, that he did everything right and the system failed him." Williams pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a photograph of a man in his mid-30s, fit and healthy, wearing a Marine dress uniform. "Master Sergeant Jake Morrison, currently serving as a senior instructor at Camp Lejeune. He teaches junior Marines how to trust their instincts and report concerns without fear of retribution. He saved lives by teaching others not to repeat the mistakes that cost your mother hers." Sarah stared at the photograph, her eyes burning. She'd thought about Morrison over the years, the young Marine who'd tried to warn command and been ignored. She'd imagined him broken, destroyed by guilt. She'd never considered that he might have survived, that he might have turned his trauma into purpose. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're about to make the same mistake Morrison almost made. You're going to blame yourself for Torres and Kim. You're going to carry their deaths like personal failures. And if you're not careful, that guilt will consume you until you can't function anymore." Williams put a hand on Sarah's good shoulder. "What happened today was a system failure that you exposed and corrected. 2 people died, but hundreds didn't. That's not consolation for their families, but it's the truth. And you need to accept it before it destroys you." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could have done better, moved faster, been smarter. But the truth was, Williams was right. She'd been carrying her mother's death for 18 years, using it as fuel to drive herself harder, push herself further. At some point, that fuel had become poison. "What happens now, ma'am?" "Now you write the most comprehensive security reform proposal the Navy has ever seen. You take everything you learned during this operation and you turn it into policy that will prevent the next attack. You testify before Congress. You train the next generation of intelligence officers. And you live with the fact that you can't save everyone, but you can save some. And some is better than none. Williams turned to walk back toward the command center, then paused. One more thing, Admiral. That young woman in the barracks, Amanda Chen. She's Marcus Chen's cousin. He asked me to make sure she was okay. Sarah felt something click into place. Chen knew she was there. That's why he moved so fast when I called about Team 5. Family makes people brave in ways nothing else can. Remember that when you're writing your reforms. Williams walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the Virginia sun. Sarah pulled out her phone, miraculously undamaged despite everything, and pulled up the personnel files for Torres and Kim. She looked at their photographs, memorized their faces. She would remember them, would carry their deaths the way she carried her mother's. Not as guilt, but as responsibility, as proof that the work mattered and couldn't be abandoned just because it was hard. Her phone rang. The number was local, not military. Admiral Mitchell, she answered. Ma'am, this is Amanda Chen. The voice was shaky but determined. I hope it's okay that I called. Lieutenant Chen gave me your number. He said you might want to talk. Sarah closed her eyes, surprised by how much she did want to talk, how much she needed to hear that at least some of the recruits had survived. It's more than okay, Amanda. How are you holding up? I don't know. I keep seeing... Her voice broke. Rodriguez. The way he didn't even hesitate. He stepped between us and them, and he didn't hesitate. That's who he was. That's who all good NCOs are. They put their people first. Is that who you are? Is that why you did all this? Sarah thought about the question, about her mother's death and her father's absence and 18 years of proving that being small didn't mean being weak. About Torres and Kim and Rodriguez and all the others she hadn't been able to save. I did this because the system that got my mother killed needed to be broken and rebuilt. The fact that it saved your life, that makes it worth it. Amanda was quiet for a moment. I'm not going to quit. You know, Davis wants to quit. Half the survivors want to quit. But I'm not going to. Because if I quit, then they win. The people who did this, they win. Sarah felt something warm spread through her chest. Pride. Hope. The sense that maybe, just maybe, the next generation would be better than hers had been. Then don't quit, Amanda. Finish your training. Become the sailor you're meant to be. And when you're ready, help me build something better. I will, I promise. Amanda paused. Ma'am, thank you for saving us, for caring enough to do something impossible. It wasn't impossible, it was just necessary. Sarah looked at the smoke still rising from the ammunition depot, at the helicopters circling overhead at the base that would never be the same after today. And you're welcome. She ended the call and started walking toward the command center where Williams and a room full of officers would be waiting to debrief her, where she'd have to explain every decision, justify every action, defend every choice that had led to this moment. Sarah wasn't looking forward to it, but she'd do it anyway, because that's what the job required. That's what service meant. And because somewhere in a cemetery in Virginia, her mother's grave bore a simple inscription, Commander Rebecca Mitchell, died in service to her country. Sarah had spent 18 years making sure that service meant something. She wasn't going to stop now. The command center was everything Sarah had expected and nothing she wanted to deal with. 47 officers crowded into a space designed for 20, all of them shouting questions, demanding answers, trying to establish who was responsible for what had just happened. Vice Admiral Williams stood at the center of it all, like the eye of a hurricane, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. Quiet! Williams didn't shout, but every voice in the room died instantly. Admiral Mitchell will brief us on the tactical situation. Everyone else will listen and take notes. Questions come after. Is that understood? A chorus of yes ma'am rippled through the room. Sarah stepped forward, her wounded shoulder throbbing despite the painkillers the corpsman had given her. She'd changed into a clean uniform, but blood still stained her hands in the creases where soap couldn't reach. She could feel every eye in the room judging her, measuring her, trying to reconcile the young woman before them with the flag officer credentials she carried. At 0600 hours this morning, I identified Michael Thompson as a probable hostile operative. Sarah began, her voice steady, despite the exhaustion pulling at her. Thompson was a civilian contractor who'd maintained deep cover on this base for approximately 5 years. Analysis of his movement patterns and communications indicated he was coordinating a multi-phase attack timed to coincide with today's training exercise. A rear admiral Sarah didn't recognize raised his hand. "Admiral Mitchell, why didn't you report this through proper channels?" "Because proper channels take time, and I had reason to believe the attack was imminent. If I'd waited for authorization to move, Torres and Kim would still be dead, but so would 37 other personnel who happened to be in the blast radius of the ammunition depot explosion." The room went silent. Everyone had seen the smoke. Everyone knew how close they'd come to catastrophic casualties. Sarah pulled up a tactical map on the command center's main display. Thompson's network consisted of 5 teams. Team 1 attempted to eliminate witnesses during the training exercise. I neutralized them. Team 2 provided overwatch and communication relay. Lieutenant Chen's quick response disrupted their coordination. Teams 3 and 4 were assigned to the ammunition depot. Chen intercepted them before they could complete the device placement, which is why the explosion was contained instead of spreading across half the base. She advanced to the next slide, showing Thompson's communications network. Team 5 was the insurance policy. If the primary attack failed, they would execute hostages to create a secondary crisis that would overwhelm response capabilities. I stopped them before they could complete that mission, but not before they killed Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez. Marcus Chen stood at the back of the room, his face drawn. When Sarah mentioned his role, several officers turned to look at him with expressions ranging from approval to suspicion. Chen had acted without authorization, had trusted intelligence from an undercover admiral instead of following protocol. That kind of initiative either earned you a medal or a court-martial, depending on how the investigation played out. "Admiral," another officer spoke up, "you say you've been undercover for 3 weeks. What were you doing during that time besides identifying Thompson? Documenting every security failure on this base, every procedural gap, every moment when someone should have questioned something and didn't." Sarah pulled up another file, this one containing her comprehensive assessment. "In 3 weeks, I identified 47 critical vulnerabilities. Thompson's network exploited 12 of them. The remaining 35 are still active threats waiting for the next infiltrator to abuse." The room erupted again. Officers shouting denials, demanding to see evidence, insisting their departments were secure. Williams let it go on for exactly 10 seconds before silencing them again. "You'll all receive copies of Admiral Mitchell's assessment. You'll review it. You'll fix the problems she identified. And you'll do it before I return for inspection in 30 days. Anyone who can't accomplish that should start preparing their resignation letter now." Sarah caught Williams's eye and saw something there, approval mixed with concern. Williams knew what this operation had cost. Not just in terms of casualties, but in terms of Sarah's own well-being. You didn't spend 3 weeks being treated like garbage, then fight through a terrorist attack, then stand in front of a room full of skeptical officers without it leaving marks. "Ma'am," Sarah said quietly, "request permission to continue the briefing in private. Some of the intelligence I gathered is classified above the clearance level of personnel in this room." Williams nodded. "Granted. Everyone below TS-SCI clearance is dismissed. The rest of you stay." 2/3 of the room filed out, leaving only a dozen officers with the highest security clearances. When the door closed behind them, Sarah pulled up the classified portion of her assessment. Thompson wasn't working alone. The network we disrupted today was the East Coast operational cell of a larger organization. Based on communications intercepts and documents recovered from Thompson's body, I believe there are at least 3 other regional cells still active West Coast, Gulf Coast, and overseas installations. The officers remaining in the room went pale. One of them, a 3-star general Sarah recognized as the head of naval intelligence, leaned forward. "Admiral Mitchell, are you telling me we have a coordinated espionage network embedded across our entire military structure?" "Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm telling you." "How long have they been in place?" "Minimum 5 years, possibly longer. Thompson's cell was activated when they received intelligence that I was conducting security assessments. They moved up their timeline to strike before I could expose them. Another officer spoke up. Then this attack, this entire operation was because of you. Sarah had been waiting for that question. Had known it would come. Torres and Kim died because I forced Thompson's hand, yes. But if I hadn't, they would have died anyway, along with hundreds of others, when the full network activated. The attack today was rushed, poorly coordinated, and ultimately failed. If they'd had another 6 months to prepare, we wouldn't be having this conversation because half of Norfolk would be a crater. The general studied her for a long moment. You're very certain of that? I am, sir, because that's what my assessment of their operational capability indicates. Thompson's network had access to sensitive areas for years. They mapped every vulnerability. They identified targets. They positioned assets. The only thing that stopped them was my investigation disrupting their timeline. And if you'd conducted your investigation through proper channels instead of going undercover. Sarah met his eyes without flinching. Then they would have been warned. They would have cleaned up their traces. They would have gone dormant. And in 6 months or a year or 5 years, they would have struck when we weren't ready. My methods were unorthodox, sir, but they worked. The general sat back, his expression unreadable. We'll see what the investigation determines. In the meantime, you're grounded. No operations. No field work. You'll remain available for debriefing and testimony. Sir, with respect, I'm the only person who's seen the full scope of this network. If we're going to roll up the other cells before they activate, you're grounded, Admiral. That's final. He stood up. Vice Admiral Williams, keep her on a short leash. The last thing we need is a flag officer going rogue again. He left, taking half the remaining officers with him. Williams waited until the door closed before speaking. He's right, you know, about the investigation. There are going to be people who see you as a hero and people who see you as a liability. The next few months will determine which narrative wins. Sarah sank into a chair, the adrenaline finally wearing off completely. I don't care about narratives, ma'am. I care about stopping the other cells. Then help me do that by staying alive and staying available to brief the teams we're deploying. You can't stop anything if you're dead or court-martialed. Court-martialed for what saving lives. For conducting an unauthorized operation. For operating outside your chain of command. For putting yourself in danger without proper support. Williams pulled up a chair across from Sarah. You did good work today. Exceptional work. But you also scared a lot of powerful people who don't like being scared. They're going to push back. Hard. Sarah thought about the officers who'd just left, about the general's expression, about the way they'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved instead of a resource to be utilized. She'd spent 18 years proving herself, and it still wasn't enough. She was still too young, too small, too unconventional for them to trust. What do you need from me, ma'am? I need you to rest. I need you to heal. And I need you to be ready to fight a different kind of battle, the political kind that happens in conference rooms instead of on battlefields. I'm not good at politics. You're better than you think. You convinced a room full of skeptical officers that your assessment was worth taking seriously. That's politics. Williams stood up. Get some sleep, Admiral. Tomorrow we start building the case for why what you did was necessary. Today, you just survive. Sarah left the command center and found Marcus Chen waiting outside, his expression anxious. Admiral, can I speak with you? Walk with me, Lieutenant. They walked in silence for a moment, moving away from the command center toward the barracks, where the survivors had been temporarily housed. Chen seemed to be working up the courage to say something, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I wanted to thank you, he said finally, for trusting me, for bringing me into the operation, even though I was just a junior officer who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. You did more than stick your nose in, Lieutenant. You identified me when no one else did. You investigated when you should have just accepted the cover identity. That kind of instinct is exactly what this military needs more of. My commanding officer doesn't see it that way. He's talking about reprimanding me for acting without authorization. Says I should have gone through proper channels before responding to your intelligence. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. Lieutenant, if you'd gone through proper channels, Amanda Chen would be dead right now. Your cousin would be dead because you followed protocol instead of trusting your judgment. Is that what your commanding officer would prefer? Chen's jaw tightened. He says there are procedures for a reason. There are, and those procedures work 99% of the time. But this was the 1% where following procedure would have gotten people killed. You made the right call. Sarah pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. I'm sending you a letter of commendation. It goes in your permanent record. Next time your commanding officer suggests you should have followed protocol, show him that letter and remind him that flag officers don't commend people for screwing up. Chen stared at his phone as the email arrived. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just keep being the kind of officer who trusts his instincts even when it's uncomfortable. The military needs more people like you. They reached the temporary barracks where the survivors had been housed. Through the windows, Sarah could see Amanda sitting with a group of other recruits, all of them talking quietly. Amanda looked up and saw Sarah, then stood and walked to the door. Admiral, Amanda said as she stepped outside. Can I talk to you? Of course. Amanda glanced at Chen, then back to Sarah. The other recruits, they're talking about what happened, about you being undercover. Some of them are angry. They think you used us, manipulated us. They're right. I did use you. I needed to see how the system really worked, and that meant experiencing it the way a real recruit would experience it. But you saved our lives. Doesn't that count for something? Sarah thought about Torres and Kim, about Rodriguez, about all the people she hadn't been able to save despite her best efforts. It counts for something. But it doesn't erase the manipulation. If they want to be angry with me, that's their right. Amanda shook her head. I'm not angry. I'm grateful. Because of you, I'm alive. Davis is alive. Most of us made it because you were there. She paused. I've been thinking about what you said, about doing what's right even when you're terrified. I want to do that. I want to be like you. No, Sarah said firmly. You don't want to be like me. You want to be the best version of yourself. That's different. What's the difference? Sarah looked at this 19-year-old woman who'd saved a life with a chair leg and now wanted to dedicate herself to service. She saw echoes of her younger self, the determination, the idealism, the belief that one person could make a difference if they just tried hard enough. The difference is that I've spent 18 years obsessed with fixing a system that failed my mother. That obsession has cost me relationships, sleep, peace of mind, and almost my life more times than I can count. You have a chance to serve without letting the mission consume you. Take that chance. Amanda was quiet for a moment. Did you ever regret it? The obsession. Every day. And I'd do it again anyway because some things are worth the cost. Sarah put a hand on Amanda's shoulder. But that doesn't mean you have to make the same choices. Learn from my mistakes instead of repeating them. Marcus Chen cleared his throat. Admiral, you have a call from Washington. They're asking for you in the secure communications facility. Sarah nodded and turned back to Amanda. Stay strong. Finish your training. And remember that courage isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose every single day. I will. Thank you, ma'am. The secure communications facility was a windowless room in the basement of the intelligence building. Sarah sat down in front of the encrypted video terminal and waited for the connection to establish. When the screen flickered to life, she found herself looking at a 4-star admiral she recognized as the Chief of Naval Operations, the highest-ranking officer in the Navy. Admiral Mitchell, the CNO said without preamble, I've been reviewing your assessment of the Norfolk attack. I've also been reviewing your service record. I have questions. Yes, sir. First question, why did you go undercover instead of conducting a standard security review? Sarah had answered this question 3 times already, but she understood that the CNO needed to hear it directly from her. Sir, standard security reviews are announced in advance. Personnel have time to prepare to hide problems to present a sanitized version of their operations. I needed to see the truth, not the performance. By lying to everyone on that base, by putting yourself in danger, by operating outside your chain of command. Yes, sir. The CNO studied her through the video feed. You understand that what you did was completely inappropriate for a flag officer. You understand that there will be consequences. I understand, sir. Good, because those consequences start now. You're being reassigned to Pentagon staff. You'll work with naval intelligence to develop the new security protocols based on your findings. You'll testify before Congress about the vulnerabilities you discovered. And you'll train the next generation of intelligence officers in the methods you developed. Sarah felt something unclench in her chest. Reassignment, not court-martial. Career continuation, not destruction. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This reassignment is conditional. You stay out of the field. You operate through proper channels. You don't conduct any more unsanctioned operations. If you can't agree to those terms, tell me now and we'll discuss other options. Sarah wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that the field was where she was most effective, where she could make the biggest difference. But Williams's words echoed in her mind, you can't stop anything if you're dead or court-martialed. I agree to the terms, sir. Excellent. You'll report to Washington in 72 hours. Use that time to complete your debriefing and get medical clearance. The CNO paused. Admiral Mitchell, what you did today was reckless, dangerous, and completely inappropriate. It was also extraordinarily effective. The military needs people who can think outside the box and take calculated risks. We just need those people to stay alive long enough to share what they've learned. Am I clear? Crystal clear, sir? The connection terminated. Sarah sat in the empty communications room processing what had just happened. She'd kept her career. She'd be able to implement the reforms she'd fought for. But she'd also been pulled from field operations, effectively ending the part of her military service that had defined her for 18 years. It felt like winning and losing at the same time. Staff Sergeant Reeves found her an hour later standing outside the barracks where Rodriguez had died. The bloodstains had been cleaned up, but Sarah could still see them in her mind. Gunny Rodriguez falling, the recruits screaming, the moment when everything had gone from training exercise to nightmare. Admiral, Reeves said quietly, I wanted to apologize for how I treated you, for not seeing, he struggled to find the words, for not seeing who you were. Sarah turned to face him. You saw exactly who I was pretending to be. That was the point. But I should have seen through it. Should have noticed the signs. You moved too well, shot too accurately, never broke under pressure. Reeves shook his head. I let my assumptions blind me. We all make assumptions, Staff Sergeant. The difference is what we do when we realize we're wrong. Sarah gestured to the barracks. Rodriguez didn't make assumptions. He saw potential in everyone and worked to develop it. That's why his Marines loved him. That's why he died protecting them. I want to be that kind of instructor. I want to honor what he taught me. Then do it. Change how you train. Look for potential instead of conformity. Build warriors instead of breaking spirits. Sarah met his eyes. And when you find someone who doesn't fit the standard template, someone who's too small, too young, too different, ask yourself whether that difference is a weakness or a strength in disguise. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. The recruits who survived, they're requesting to continue training, even after everything that happened, even after seeing Rodriguez die and nearly dying themselves. They want to stay. All of them. 7 out of 9. Davis and another kid named Patterson want to leave. Can't blame them after what they saw. But the others, including your friend Amanda, they want to finish what they started. Sarah felt that warmth in her chest again. Hope. Pride. The sense that maybe the next generation would take the lessons learned today and build something better with them. Then train them, Staff Sergeant. Train them to be the kind of warriors who protect each other, who trust their instincts, who refuse to let assumptions dictate their capabilities. Train them to be better than we were. I will. Reeves saluted crisp and proper. Thank you, Admiral, for showing me what I was doing wrong, for giving me a chance to fix it. Sarah returned the salute. Thank you for being willing to change. That takes more courage than most people realize. She left Reeves standing outside the barracks and walked toward the base perimeter where Williams had arranged for a car to take her to temporary quarters. The sun was setting now, painting Norfolk in shades of orange and red. In the distance, crews were still working to secure the ammunition depot to clear debris to assess damage. 2 people had died today. Dozens had been wounded. A major terrorist network had been disrupted. Security protocols would be reformed. Lives would be saved because of what happened here. Sarah tried to feel victorious, tried to focus on the wins instead of the losses. But all she could see were Torres's and Kim's faces in her mind. All she could feel was the weight of decisions made in split seconds that determined who lived and who died. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Jake Morrison. Vice Admiral Williams gave me your contact information. She said you might want to talk. I'm here if you need someone who understands what carrying that weight feels like." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Jake Morrison, the Marine who'd tried to warn command about the infiltrator who killed her mother. The man who'd carried that guilt for 18 years just like she'd carried her mother's death. Williams had been right, they needed to talk. Needed to help each other understand that doing everything right didn't always mean saving everyone. She typed back, "Thank you, I'd like that. After I finish the debriefing in Washington, maybe we can meet." The response came quickly. "Looking forward to it. Your mother would be proud of you. I hope you know that." Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She hadn't let herself cry since the operation began. Her mother, Commander Rebecca Mitchell, killed 18 years ago by a system that didn't listen to warnings from people it deemed too junior to matter. The entire reason Sarah had spent her life fighting to fix that broken system. And maybe finally that system was actually changing. The car arrived. Sarah climbed in her wounded shoulder, protesting the movement. Tomorrow, she'd start the debriefing process. The day after, she'd begin compiling her comprehensive assessment. In 72 hours, she'd report to Washington and start the next phase of her career. But tonight, she'd remember Torres and Kim. She'd honor Rodriguez. She'd carry the weight of decisions made under fire, knowing that some weight never gets lighter. You just get stronger at bearing it. The car pulled away from Norfolk, leaving behind the base that would never be the same after today. Leaving behind the recruits who'd survived and the ones who hadn't. Leaving behind the beginning of something new, a military that might finally learn to value evidence over ego, instinct over rank, capability over appearance. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself feel it all, the pain, the exhaustion, the grief, the hope. Tomorrow she'd be strong again. Tonight she'd just be human. And that was enough. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a congressional committee in a hearing room that felt designed to intimidate. 23 senators and representatives sat elevated above her, their faces ranging from skeptical to hostile. The gallery behind her was packed with media, military brass, and civilians who'd read about the Norfolk attack in sanitized news reports that barely scratched the surface of what had really happened. Admiral Mitchell, Senator Patricia Hawkins began, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who'd already decided Sarah was guilty of something. "You're asking this committee to approve a complete overhaul of military security protocols based on an operation you conducted without authorization. An operation that resulted in 2 deaths and nearly started an international incident when we arrested 17 foreign nationals on U.S. soil." Sarah kept her expression neutral. She'd been prepped for this by Williams and a team of Pentagon lawyers who'd spent the past week drilling her on how to testify without saying anything that could be used against her in a court-martial proceeding that was still theoretically possible. "Senator, I'm asking this committee to approve reforms that will prevent future attacks. The Norfolk operation demonstrated critical vulnerabilities in our security infrastructure. Those vulnerabilities still exist at installations across the country and overseas. Every day we delay implementing these reforms is another day our personnel are at risk. But you acted without authorization. You deceived your fellow service members. You put yourself in danger unnecessarily." Hawkins leaned forward. "Some would call that reckless. Some would call it insubordination. What do you call it?" Sarah met the senator's eyes without flinching. "I call it necessary, Senator. My mother was killed 18 years ago because a junior Marine reported suspicious activity and was ignored. I needed to know if we'd learned anything since then. The answer is, we hadn't. The system that failed in 2007 was still failing in 2025. If I hadn't conducted that operation, Thompson's network would have activated with catastrophic results." "You don't know that. You're speculating." "I'm not speculating, Senator. I'm reading from the operational plans we recovered from Thompson's cell." Sarah pulled up a document on the display screen behind her. Phase 2 of their operation called for simultaneous attacks on 8 military installations. Estimated casualties, 400 to 600 personnel. Estimated damage, complete destruction of critical infrastructure at 3 naval bases. This isn't speculation. This is their written plan. The room went silent. Sarah could see several committee members reading the document, their faces going pale as they processed what they were seeing. Senator Marcus Reed, who'd been relatively quiet until now, spoke up. Admiral Mitchell, I've reviewed your service record. You've served with distinction for 18 years. You've earned commendations, led successful operations, demonstrated exceptional capability. Why risk all of that by going rogue? Because 18 years of service meant nothing if I couldn't fix the problem that killed my mother. Because being a flag officer meant I had the authority to demand change, but not the evidence to force it. Because sometimes the only way to prove a system is broken is to break it yourself and show everyone the cracks. Reed nodded slowly. I'm inclined to support your reforms, Admiral, but I need to know if you had to do it again, would you do it the same way? Sarah thought about Torres and Kim, about Rodriguez, about the recruits who'd survived but would carry the trauma of that day for the rest of their lives. She thought about Amanda Chen's face when she'd swung that chair leg to save Davis, about Marcus Chen's decision to trust intelligence that came from an unauthorized source, about Reeves learning to question his assumptions. No, Senator, I wouldn't do it the same way. The room erupted in whispers. Hawkins leaned forward with a predatory smile. So you admit you made mistakes? I admit I would have moved faster. I would have identified Thompson earlier. I would have positioned resources more effectively to prevent the deaths of Torres and Kim. Sarah's voice remained steady. But I wouldn't change the decision to go undercover. That was the only way to see the truth. The mistakes I made were tactical. The strategy was sound. 2 people died because of your tactical mistakes. 2 people died because Thompson's network had 5 years to embed themselves in our military infrastructure while command ignored warning signs. I'm responsible for not moving fast enough to save them, but I'm not responsible for the system that allowed Thompson to operate undetected for half a decade. Sarah paused. Senator, if you want to hold someone accountable for those deaths, start with the officers who approved Thompson's security clearance without proper vetting. Start with the commanders who created a culture where junior personnel were afraid to report concerns. Start with the policymakers who cut security budgets while increasing operational tempo. There's plenty of blame to go around and I'll accept my share, but don't pretend this was about one unauthorized operation when it was really about systemic failure. Hawkins' face flushed red. Admiral, you're out of line. I'm telling the truth, Senator. That's what you asked me here to do. William, sitting in the front row of the gallery, gave Sarah the smallest nod of approval. They'd agreed beforehand that Sarah would be deferential until pushed, then she'd push back hard. Hawkins had pushed. Now Sarah was pushing back, and the committee members who'd been skeptical were starting to look thoughtful instead of hostile. Senator Reed spoke again. Let's talk about these reforms you're proposing, the Mitchell Protocol as it's being called. Walk us through the key components. Sarah advanced to the next slide in her presentation. The Mitchell Protocol has 3 primary components. First, we establish a direct reporting structure for security concerns that bypasses traditional chain of command. If a private first class sees something suspicious, they can report it directly to a centralized threat assessment team without going through their commanding officer. This eliminates the bottleneck where junior personnel are dismissed or ignored. That undermines command authority, another senator objected. It protects command from liability when something they should have caught slips through. If a private reports a concern and it's investigated and cleared, command is protected. If a private reports a concern and it's ignored and results in an attack, command is exposed. The protocol protects everyone by ensuring legitimate concerns are evaluated based on evidence, not the rank of the person reporting. Sarah moved to the next slide. Second component, we implement continuous background monitoring for all personnel with access to sensitive areas. Thompson maintained his cover for 5 years because we checked his background once when he was cleared and never checked again. Under the new protocol, automated systems flag anomalies in behavior patterns, financial transactions, communications, and movement. This doesn't eliminate privacy. It adds another layer of verification. That sounds expensive, Hawkins interjected. It costs approximately $8 million per year to implement across all installations. Thompson's attack, if successful, would have caused an estimated $400 million in damage and countless lives lost. The return on investment is considerable. Sarah didn't give Hawkins time to respond before moving to the third slide. Final component, we train all personnel from recruits to flag officers in threat recognition and reporting procedures. Currently, most service members couldn't identify a sophisticated infiltrator if they were standing next to one. We change that through mandatory training that teaches people what to look for and how to report it. Senator Reid studied the presentation. Admiral, this is comprehensive, but it requires cooperation from every branch of service, every command level, every installation worldwide. That's a massive cultural shift. How do you propose we actually implement this? By making it mandatory, by holding commanders accountable for implementation, by tracking metrics and publishing results so everyone can see which installations are compliant and which aren't. Sarah's voice carried the conviction of someone who'd spent 6 months refining these proposals. Senator, we either commit to this completely or we don't do it at all. Half measures won't work. Thompson's network was too sophisticated for partial solutions. The hearing continued for another 3 hours. Sarah answered questions about operational details, cost projections, implementation timelines, and expected outcomes. Some senators remained skeptical. Others became supporters. By the time the committee chair called for a recess, Sarah had no idea which way the vote would go. Williams met her outside the hearing room. You did well, especially the part where you told Hawkins to start looking at systemic failure instead of blaming you for everything. Did I go too far? Maybe. But sometimes going too far is what it takes to get people's attention. Williams handed Sarah a bottle of water. The vote is tomorrow. My sources say it's going to be close, but I think you convinced enough of them that the protocol is worth trying. Sarah drank half the bottle without stopping. The hearing room had been hot, and stress dehydration was real. What happens if they vote no? Then we implement what we can through executive action and hope the next attack convinces them we were right. But that's not going to happen. They'll approve it. They just need to make you sweat first, so they feel like they maintain their authority. Politics, Sarah muttered. Welcome to the second half of your career. This is what flag officers do. We fight bureaucratic battles so the people under us can focus on their missions. Get used to it. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen. Amanda just graduated basic training, top of her class, requested assignment to intelligence school. Thought you'd want to know. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. Amanda Chen. The 19-year-old who'd saved a life with a chair leg and decided she wanted to serve despite everything she'd witnessed. That kind of resilience was exactly what the military needed. She texted back, "Tell her congratulations and tell her I'm proud of her." Another text came through, this one from Jake Morrison. Watched your testimony on C-SPAN. Your mother would have been proud. Coffee tomorrow before you head back to D.C. Sarah had been meeting with Morrison once a month since the Norfolk attack. Their conversations had helped both of them process the guilt they carried him for not preventing Rebecca Mitchell's death, her for not saving Torres and Kim. Morrison had become something between a mentor and a friend, someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the cost of service. Coffee sounds good, she replied. 0700 at the place near Arlington. See you there. The next morning, Sarah met Morrison at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Arlington National Cemetery. He looked good, healthy, clear-eyed, no longer carrying the haunted expression that had marked their first meeting 6 months ago. Talking about the past had helped him as much as it had helped Sarah. Shared trauma, when processed properly, could become shared strength. Congratulations on the hearing, Morrison said as they sat down with their coffee. From what I saw, you handled the senators perfectly. I told one of them to stop blaming me and start looking at systemic failure. William says I might have gone too far. Morrison laughed. That's not too far. That's exactly what needed to be said. These people need to hear hard truths, even if it makes them uncomfortable. He took a sip of coffee. I've been thinking about your protocol. about the direct reporting structure. If we'd had that in 2007, if I could have bypassed command and reported directly to a threat assessment team, your mother might still be alive, Sarah finished. I know, that's why I built it into the protocol. So the next junior Marine who sees something wrong doesn't have to pray that someone senior will listen. How does it feel knowing you're about to change the entire military culture? Sarah thought about the question. Terrifying. Exciting. Like I'm finally doing what I was supposed to do all along. She met Morrison's eyes. How does it feel knowing you helped shape that change? Everything you taught me about trusting instinct, about not letting fear of being wrong stop you from speaking up. That's all in the protocol. I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know. I just reminded you that being right when you're young doesn't make you wrong. It makes everyone else late to the party. Morrison set down his coffee. There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I'm retiring next year. 20 years of service and I'm done. But before I go, I wanted to thank you for giving me closure, for finishing what I started, for proving that your mother's death wasn't meaningless. Sarah felt her throat tighten. It wasn't meaningless. It taught us what not to do, how to build something better. Exactly. And now we have. The Mitchell Protocol is going to save lives for decades. Your mother's legacy isn't her death. It's the system you built to prevent other deaths like hers. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two warriors who'd fought different battles, but arrived at the same understanding. Some things were worth the cost. Some sacrifices led to progress. Some deaths sparked revolutions in how people thought about security capability and the value of listening to voices that didn't fit traditional patterns. Sarah's phone rang, Williams's number. She answered immediately. Admiral, the vote came in. The committee approved the Mitchell Protocol unanimously. Full implementation across all branches, all installations beginning immediately. You won. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the news wash over her. 6 months of fighting. 6 months of testimony and briefings and political maneuvering. 6 months of defending decisions made in split seconds under fire. And now finally it was real. The protocol would be implemented. The system would change. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. You did this. You fought for it. You bled for it. Now comes the hard part, actually implementing it and making sure it works. Williams paused. Get back to DC. We have a lot of work to do. Sarah ended the call and looked at Morrison, who'd been listening to her side of the conversation with growing understanding. You did it, he said simply. We did it. All of us. Everyone who refused to accept that the system couldn't change. Morrison raised his coffee cup. To Commander Rebecca Mitchell. May her death have meant something after all. Sarah raised her own cup. To everyone who died because the system failed, may we honor them by building something better. They finished their coffee and walked together toward Arlington National Cemetery, where Rebecca Mitchell's grave stood among thousands of others who'd died in service. Sarah had visited the grave dozens of times over the years, but today felt different. Today she came not with guilt or grief, but with news. With proof that her mother's death had sparked something larger than either of them. The grave was simple, marked with a white headstone that matched all the others. Rebecca Mitchell's name and rank and dates of service. No mention of how she died or why. Just the basic facts that said she'd served and fallen. Sarah knelt beside the grave Morrison, standing respectfully a few feet back. She pulled out a small case from her pocket and opened it, revealing the brass chevrons her father had given her when she was 8 years old. The ones that had belonged to Bobby Sullivan. The ones she'd carried through 18 years of service as a reminder of why the work mattered. Mom, Sarah said quietly, I know you can't hear me. I know you're gone. But I need to tell you anyway. I kept the promise I made at your funeral. I made sure that what happened to you couldn't happen to someone else's mother. The Mitchell Protocol is real now. It's going to protect people. It's going to save lives. Because of you. Because you died fighting for something that mattered. She placed the chevrons on the grave next to the flowers Morrison had brought. Dad gave me these. Told me they belonged to the best NCO he ever served with. Told me to remember where I came from. I'm leaving them here with you because I don't need them anymore. I remember. I'll always remember. Morrison stepped forward and placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder. She'd be proud of you. Everything you've accomplished, everything you've become. She'd be so damn proud. I hope so. I really hope so. They stood there together for several minutes, honoring a woman who'd died 18 years ago, but whose death had set in motion changes that would reverberate for decades. Rebecca Mitchell hadn't known that her final moments would inspire her daughter to transform military culture. She'd just been doing her job, protecting her people, serving her country. But that simple act of service had been enough. Had been everything. Sarah's phone buzzed again. A text from Amanda Chen. Admiral Lieutenant Chen told me you were asking about me. I wanted to thank you for everything you taught me. I'm headed to intelligence school next month, hoping to follow in your footsteps. Also, my classmates want me to tell you that we're all studying the Mitchell Protocol. It's required reading now. You're literally changing how we're being trained. That's amazing. Sarah typed back, you don't need to follow my footsteps. Make your own path. Just make sure it's one that matters. Proud of you, Amanda. Morrison read over her shoulder and smiled. That's the girl who saved someone with a chair leg. That's her. 19 years old, survived a terrorist attack, still decided to serve. She's going to do incredible things. Because you showed her it was possible. Because you proved that being young and small and unexpected doesn't mean being weak. That's your real legacy, Sarah. Not the protocol. The people you inspired to be better than they thought they could be. They walked back toward the cemetery entrance, leaving Rebecca Mitchell's grave behind, but carrying her memory forward. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from an 8-year-old girl at her mother's funeral to a flag officer who'd changed military history. The path hadn't been straight. It had been full of obstacles and setbacks, and moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. But she hadn't given up. Because her mother hadn't raised a quitter, and her father had taught her that being strong meant doing what was right, even when it was terrifying. Because Bobby Sullivan had tried to warn command and been ignored, and that failure had convinced Sarah that the system needed to change. Because Torres and Kim had died, and their deaths demanded meaning beyond the simple tragedy of lives cut short. Back in Washington, Sarah spent the next 3 months overseeing the initial implementation of the Mitchell Protocol. It was brutal work coordinating across branches, training personnel, installing new systems, fighting resistance from commanders who didn't want to change. But slowly, steadily, the protocol took root. Installations began reporting suspicious activity through the direct channels. Threat assessment teams investigated and cleared dozens of false alarms, but also identified 3 potential infiltrators who were quietly removed before they could cause harm. The protocol was working. Not perfectly, nothing in the military ever worked perfectly, but well enough to prove the concept was sound. 6 months after the congressional hearing, Vice Admiral Williams called Sarah into her office. Admiral Mitchell, I have news. You're being promoted to full Rear Admiral, 2 stars. Youngest person to achieve that rank in naval history. Congratulations. Sarah sat down slowly, processing the information. Ma'am, I wasn't expecting. You earned it. The protocol is working. The congressional testimony was flawless. You've trained 17 intelligence officers in your methods, and they're already producing results. The Navy needs people like you at senior levels. People who can think strategically and act tactically. People who understand that the mission matters more than the career. Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored. Williams studied her for a moment. Are you happy, Sarah? After everything that's happened, after all the fighting and the testimony and the politics, are you happy with where you are? Sarah thought about the question honestly. Was she happy? She'd achieved her goal. The protocol was real. The system was changing. Her mother's death had meaning. But Torres and Kim were still dead. Rodriguez was still gone. She still carried the weight of decisions made under fire. I'm satisfied, Sarah said finally. I'm doing work that matters. That's all I ever wanted. Good, because we're not done. The Mitchell Protocol is just the beginning. There are other systems that need fixing, other problems that need solving. And you're the person who's going to help fix them. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the Pentagon briefing room where this had all begun, addressing a room full of young intelligence officers who'd volunteered to be trained in her methods. She was 26 now, wearing 2 stars, carrying responsibilities that would have crushed her younger self. But she'd learned how to bear the weight, had learned that some burdens couldn't be set down, they could only be carried with better technique. The Mitchell Protocol has been operational for 2 years, Sarah told the assembled officers. In that time, we've identified 43 potential infiltrators. We've prevented 11 attacks. We've saved an estimated 800 lives. But more importantly, we've changed the culture. Junior personnel now know they can report concerns without fear of retaliation. Senior commanders now know they'll be held accountable if they ignore those concerns. The system is better than it was. A young lieutenant raised his hand. Admiral, some people say the protocol is too aggressive, that it creates paranoia and undermines trust between service members. How do you respond to that? I respond by asking them to define too aggressive. Is preventing attacks too aggressive? Is saving lives too aggressive? Is holding people accountable for security failures too aggressive? Sarah met the lieutenant's eyes. The protocol doesn't create paranoia, it creates awareness. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, maybe they needed to be uncomfortable. Complacency kills. Paranoia is just readiness by another name. Another officer spoke up. Ma'am, you were only 23 when you conducted the Norfolk operation. Do you think age affected how people responded to your findings? Absolutely. People dismissed me because I was young. They assumed I didn't have the experience or judgment to make critical assessments. That assumption gave me the cover I needed to operate effectively. Age bias works both ways. It can limit you, or you can weaponize it. I chose to weaponize it. The briefing continued for another hour. Sarah shared tactics, strategies, lessons learned from failures and successes. She talked about the importance of trusting instinct even when it contradicted conventional wisdom. She talked about the burden of command and the cost of making life and death decisions with incomplete information. She talked about her mother, about Torres and Kim, about everyone who'd died because systems failed them. And she talked about hope, about the possibility of building something better, about the next generation of officers who would take the protocol and improve it, refine it, make it even more effective at protecting the people who served. When the briefing ended, Amanda Chen approached her. Amanda was 21 now, a junior intelligence officer who'd been fast-tracked through training based on her performance and potential. She'd grown into the warrior Sarah had seen in her during that terrorist attack, confident, capable, unafraid to take risks when the mission demanded it. Admiral, I wanted to thank you again for everything you taught me. Everything you showed me was possible. You taught yourself, Amanda. You made the choice to be brave. I just gave you the opportunity. Can I ask you something? Do you ever regret it? The Norfolk operation, the way everything played out. Sarah thought about Torres and Kim, about Rodriguez, about the recruits who'd survived but carried trauma, about Reeves learning to question his assumptions and Marcus Chen learning to trust his instincts, about a protocol that was saving lives every day, about a mother who died 18 years ago, and a daughter who'd spent her life honoring that sacrifice. No, Sarah said finally. I don't regret it. I regret the losses. I regret not moving faster. But I don't regret forcing the system to change. Some things are worth the cost. This was one of them. Amanda nodded understanding in her eyes. When I have kids someday, I'm going to tell them about you. About the admiral who refused to accept that the system couldn't change. About the woman who was underestimated and used that to save lives. About the warrior who proved that size and age and appearance don't matter when you have the courage to do what's right. Sarah felt tears threaten, but refused to let them fall. Tell them about your mother, too. About Commander Rebecca Mitchell. Because none of this would exist without her sacrifice. She's the real hero in this story. I'm just the daughter who refused to let her death be meaningless. That evening, Sarah stood at her office window overlooking the Pentagon grounds, watching personnel move between buildings. Young officers and enlisted personnel going about their duties protected by systems they didn't even know existed. protected by a protocol that had been built on sacrifice and struggle, and the absolute refusal to accept that things couldn't get better. Her phone rang. Morrison's number. "Sarah, I heard about your promotion. Congratulations. 2 stars at 26, that's incredible." "Thanks, Jake. How's retirement treating you?" "Better than expected. I'm teaching now. High school kids who want to join the military, preparing them for what service really means, making sure they understand that doing the right thing isn't always easy or popular or safe, but it's always worth it." He paused. "I tell them about you sometimes. About the little girl who promised at her mother's funeral that she'd make things better. About the admiral who kept that promise. They need to hear stories like yours. Stories about people who refused to quit when quitting would have been easier." "I'm not special, Jake. I'm just stubborn." "Stubbornness is a superpower when applied correctly. You proved that." Morrison's voice grew serious. "Your mother would be proud. I know I've said that before, but it needs to be said again. She'd be so damn proud of everything you've built." Sarah looked at the reflection of her uniform in the window, at the 2 stars on her collar, at the ribbons representing years of service and sacrifice. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who'd clutched brass chevrons at her father's funeral and promised to never let anyone make her small. About the 23-year-old who'd gone undercover to prove a point. About the 26-year-old who'd changed military history through sheer force of will and refusal to accept failure. "I hope so," Sarah said quietly. "I really hope so." She ended the call and returned to her desk, where a stack of reports waited for her review. Intelligence assessments, threat evaluations, implementation updates from installations worldwide. The work never ended. The mission continued. Lives depended on her vigilance, her judgment, her willingness to make hard decisions. But Sarah was ready. She'd spent 18 years preparing for this, for the responsibility of leadership, for the burden of command, for the knowledge that every decision she made would ripple outward, affecting hundreds or thousands of lives she'd never meet. This was what service meant. Not glory or recognition or gratitude, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that somewhere someone was alive because you did your job well. Someone's mother came home because you caught a threat before it activated. Someone's child graduated basic training because you created a system that protected them. That was enough. That had always been enough. Sarah Mitchell picked up the first report and started reading, ready to face whatever challenges came next, carrying her mother's memory forward into a future that was safer, stronger, and better because a little girl had once made a promise at a funeral and spent her life keeping it.